Hello, inmates, and welcome to the cellblock Scorch week 236B. This is Bones, and I'm recording as the winner of this week's Scorch. This week's prompt was given by Red, and it was, the most awkward part of your high school reunion is finding out that even now, 10 years later, everyone still thinks you're the one who set the principal's car on fire. Just a fun fact for everyone that I learned while researching for this Scorch, the statute of limitations for arson is actually 10 years. So, if you can get away with it until your 10-year high school reunion, then they legitimately cannot press charges. We at Stellacor do not condone crime. Anyway, this week's Scorch is entitled Blaze It. She should have turned around as soon as she got to the welcome banner. Hell, she shouldn't have gotten as far as accepting the invitation. It wasn't like she kept contact with many people from high school anyway, and there weren't too many people she even wanted to see. The one person was probably Ryan, but guess what? They'd been keeping in contact, and she didn't need to go to this dumb reunion to talk to him anyway. Just because he was a popular guy in high school and he wanted to go to the reunion, it didn't mean she had to tag along, no matter how much he insisted that everyone would miss her if she didn't show up. It was lip service, of course, and he would probably end up ditching her to flip between the throngs of people who demanded his attention. But when the terrible feeling in her gut welled up at the sight of the "Welcome Back Class of '98" banner, she had ignored it and walked in anyway. Because Ryan said he was already here. She had made sure not to arrive before him, and at the very least, she was going to get some food for her trouble. No one really noticed when she walked in and grabbed the name tag off the table, creeping unobtrusively around the edges of the room and keeping an eye out for Ryan. Unfortunately, as she'd expected, he was smack dab in the middle of the gymnasium, surrounded by people who looked vaguely familiar. With a sigh, she started to slide through the crowd with her head down, jostling past people and leaving before they really glanced in her direction. "Hey," she hissed, jabbing Ryan fiercely in the side when she reached him. "There!" He grinned without even having to look. "You really came!" He was being too loud already, the group he was talking to turning their attention to her. And yet, somehow, he got even louder when he waved his arms and shouted for the room to hear, "Guys! Verochka came! I told you she would!" And, inexplicably, given her non-existent social life in high school, the room quieted, and it seemed that almost everyone's eyes turned to seek her out. And suddenly there she was, the center of attention in a packed gymnasium, people giving her expressions from awed to uncomfortable, and she had no idea why. "Blaze it!" shouted a voice she didn't recognize from somewhere in the crowd, and suddenly the tension broke. Half the crowd shuffled away muttering, the other half surged forward chattering, several more shouting "Blaze it!" into the din. And of course, that was what people remembered. Ver had never figured out why people kept saying that at her in the halls during senior year, shortly after the incident. But she figured the whole school mocking her for being a pothead was better than the alternative. "See, Ver, I told you everyone wanted to see you." Ryan positively cackled as Verochka took advantage of their relative statures and climbed him like a tree to get out of the middle of the crowd. Except that she was still very much in the middle of the crowd. It's just that now she was above most of them, and that actually made it way easier for them to cheer and stare at her. "What did you do?" she demanded, only barely not having him in a chokehold. "Me?" He still looked much too gleeful about all of this. "I didn't do anything. This is all you, Ver. Don't sell yourself short. You're the author of your own fame." "You're a legend!" someone from the crowd cheered. "You didn't really think we'd forget what you did to the principal's car?" asked another, and time nearly slowed to a halt as another cursed being shouted, "Blaze it." The flipping car? The car which, in their senior year, had been set ablaze. Flipping blaze it. The fire that no one had ever figured out who had set, except that somehow the fact that Verochka and the principal had a Cold War going on, a long and uninvolved story, and she hadn't been with anyone at the time it happened, meant that she was guilty. An accusation that had only been withdrawn because Ryan had sworn up and down that not only would Ver never do such a thing, but that he was with her at the time, so she couldn't have. It was a lie, of course, but one based on the fact that he knew she wouldn't ever do that. It was a Cold War. Fire was anything but. "I didn't do that! You vouched for me!" she shrieked, and somewhere in the back of her mind noted that it was probably the loudest anyone here save for Ryan had ever heard her be. And yet, every single one of them believed that she had committed arson. "Because I didn't want you to go to jail. Don't worry, the statute of limitations on arson is 10 years. I looked it up. I didn't do it!" And honestly, Verochka toppling their gentle giant of a classmate was probably the least persuasive thing she could have done for her case. But it was too late now.
Hello, this is Red. I am the judge for this week. What do I have to say? Mostly that I thought Bones, their Scorch, was just very funny to me. I was kind of sad that we didn't actually find out who set it on fire, but I also think that made it better in a way. Yeah, but Styx, their piece was also very good. It took like a little bit of a different route, and it's explained what happened, which is also funny, but it's more of a like series of unfortunate events type of thing. Rather than a you were blamed for something you didn't do type of thing. Yeah. That's all I really have to say. It's a fun time, and I would recommend reading both of them if you have the time and money.
So yeah, this was just a fun little one-shot in a mundane world, which, by the way, is a tag on our Patreon for any pieces that have no fantasy elements and focus on regular people. It just really amused me to imagine that people had been shouting "Blaze it" at this lady for years, and she thought she was being bullied for being a druggie when they were actually trying to cheer her on in a way that wouldn't get her thrown into jail for arson. Yeah, I don't have much to say about it, but I enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. The prompt I gave for week 237B was, "I know you're an imposter because the real you is way more pathetic." Which I don't think came from anything specific, but it is just my favorite spot the imposter trope. Like, realizing that your friend has been replaced because the replacement is cooler or smarter or whatever than the original. Not in like a mean way, but in a fond, funny haha way, you know? One example that comes to mind is there's a show called The Troop, which is super funny, and they're trying to find who's replaced by a shape-shifting monster in one of the episodes, and one of the guys uses the word obfuscate. And he is not known for being smart. So everyone immediately is like, yeah, no, you're way too dumb to know that word. You're the imposter. Which is then negated because he quotes a comic book line that uses it. And they're like, okay, fine, but you're on thin ice. But that sort of thing is what I wanted. I love it. Anything that involves making the imposter, like, take a test and then revealing that the real one would have failed and passing is actually a black mark on their credibility, or they react calmly and coolly to a situation, and everyone is like, absolutely not. My friend is a nervous wreck. It's just so funny. I love that trope. So look forward to those because the authors really came through. As for personal projects, if anyone's interested, I've finally started posting things on my Tumblr, which I've had for 7 years, and just started putting things on like 2 weeks ago. My handle is, as always, Bones Don't Melt, and it's a lot of fandom nonsense that pops into my head while watching shows, as well as my art, such as the One Piece fleet designs that I've mentioned making before. So if you want to hang out on there, feel free to find me. I crave validation. And the first real episode of the Westward Eye podcast is out. Again, I'm in episode 7, but if you like westerns and body horror, then I'd recommend listening to it. They're dropping 1 episode a month, though, so be warned that it's slow going. And if you want to wait until it's all out and binge it instead, I will announce when that happens on our podcast, so you can keep an ear out. As usual, thanks for listening, and consider checking out our Patreon to read the embers if you like our style. See you next time, and keep that fire burning. The Cellblock Scorch is a production of Stellacore, an independent group of nerds sharing their obsessions with the world. We can be reached at thestellacore@gmail.com, through comments on your podcast platform of choice, our Instagram, Stella_core, and at our YouTube, also called Stellacore. Follow Cellblock Scorch Podcast on Instagram, or the Cellblock Scorch on Tumblr to see the prompt the day before the episode drops and a quote from each Scorch the day after, with flavor commentary from Red, our social media manager. Feel free to check out our other productions on our YouTube channel or our cosplays on Instagram. If you would like to support our creative endeavors, you can give a one-time tip to the Ko-Fi of the writer of your favorite Scorches, or check out our Patreon, linked in the show notes. There, you can access the Scorches and episode transcripts for free, or sign up for Spark level support for $5 a month to gain access to our embers as well.